Alright, so I had a chance to check out the Monsters and Memories playtest on the 11th of November, and I have to say, as far as what I've seen so far of the game, I'm pretty excited for what they've done. They do have quite a few hurdles to get over, and we'll kind of talk about that a little bit later on in the video. The game itself is actually pretty solid for an alpha build of a game. Some of the things that I did have an issue with were the frame rate. The lag were pretty bad. I noticed that the frame rate in the starting area with all the other players around, it would dip down as low as like 10, which made it kind of hard to get around and kind of hard to explore. But as soon as I moved away from those populated areas, it got a little bit better. There were no graphic options really for me to try to tweak and make the frame rate better, so I just had to get away from everybody. I noticed that the hide corpse all function, like you see in EQ, was there, and that made it so you hit all the corpses. That helped the frame rate a little bit. And then we'll talk about kind of the issues that I had with lag as we get into the combat section of this video. But overall, I was actually really shocked at how much work they've put in and how much content really was there for an alpha build of the game. And there was a lot to fill the time that they had the server up. I could have stayed on there all day. It was only up for a few hours, but obviously Monsters and Memories, it borrows heavily from the EverQuest design philosophy, so they have a good foundation to build off of. A lot of the unique familiar skills that you see in EQ were all there. So I imagine that helps them build the game a little bit faster than if they were starting from scratch. A lot of the same classes with a few additionals that I saw that I'm a little bit interested in seeing how they play. One of those was the Inquisitor class, which from what I was looking at almost seemed like an enchanter melee hybrid. For the graphics were pretty impressive. The animations were nice and smooth, the lighting and the shadows looked good, the water looked amazing, the skybox, oh my gosh. There were several times where, especially at night, I just stopped and panned the camera up to the sky, and one thing I noticed that was a really cool detail was as the time progressed, the skybox moved, the position of the stars moved, the position of the moons moved, and I thought that was a really neat touch that adds to that immersiveness. The spell effects really could use some more visual flair. Overall, it was like a solid place to start, and I imagine that as the game becomes more mature, they're going to make those spell effects look even better. I would like to see a little bit more detail on the character and the NPC models, but for right now, they look pretty good. The animations, like I said, they look great, so they have the foundation there to build off of. A lot of the city also looked like it was using placeholder textures, so I imagine at some point they're going to add a little bit more polish to those textures as well. As far as locations, the world itself instilled that sense of wonderment. There were several times during the playtest where I was looking off at distant objects and going, oh, what's over here? Then I would run out to those locations and see what was out there, and there's still a lot to be added, but the world actually drew me in and made me want to explore it, which is a really good sign for a game that's this early on in development. And I actually woke up this morning wishing I could play the game, which I also think is a really good sign because, as you know, I'm an old school EQ vet. A lot of new MMOs don't really appeal to me, so for a newer game to get me interested and make me wake up and want to play it is a really good sign. And that tells me that they're really targeting their core audience because I do feel like I'm part of that core audience of old school EQ players who are a little bit disillusioned with the MMOs that are out on the market, the newer game design philosophies. I think that this game is trying to target that niche, and I'm part of that niche, so I'm really excited about that. As for world building, we're really seeing that original EQ core design in Monsters and Memories. For example, I was running around Knights Harbor, the main city, for the playtest, and I found a spot where there were some guards that conned KOS to me. That's a design that we see a lot of times in EQ, where even safe areas may have unsafe NPCs based off of the faction system that's in place. Even in the newbie garden, I noticed that there were higher level enemies that were KOS to the player, and that's a design that we see a lot of times in EQ where there will be a safe area, but there's a redcon higher level enemy walking through those areas that keeps the lower level players on their toes. And that's a design that we see also in MUDs going further back before EQ to games like Sojourn and Toral Mud, the MUDs that inspired EverQuest. There were usually one or two higher level enemies in the lower level zones that would path around, and that would keep the player on their toes. Overall, the city of Knights Harbor is absolutely massive. There were a ton of areas to explore. I noticed that every building that I went up to that had a door, I could open the door and go inside. There was nothing inside yet. There were no NPCs or shops in a majority of the buildings, but I think that shows a lot of promise that they're going to fill this entire world out, and hopefully they fill it out with a lot of world building, storyline, flavor text, and different things to truly immerse the player. The music was really atmospheric, and it gave this almost DAOC, Dark Age of Camelot, ambient feeling. It was a pleasure to listen to as I explored Knights Harbor. And then I really liked how each guild hall in Knights Harbor was really unique. Like the Necromancers had the Necropolis, the Wizard and Mage classes had the floating Wizard Tower, kind of like what we have in Freeport, but much, much bigger. And then the druids were in their own like little park area, which was kind of a neat touch. As far as combat goes, the combat actually felt to me more like Dark Age of Camelot than EverQuest. But it had all of that same core design that EQ vets should be used to, so if you're coming from EQ, Monsters and Memories is still going to feel really familiar to you. I played a Necromancer and all the spells were really familiar to me. There was one nice touch. I had a choice of 3 level 1 pet spells to choose from, each with a different ability. So you can see how they're keeping the original design of EQ intact, but they're just making some tweaks to kind of add some more flavor to it or add some more depth to it. One thing I am glad to see is how the pets stay with you as you zone, which is a really nice touch. That was a quality of life improvement that I would love to have seen in EQ as far back as the early days. One big difference that I see is the incorporation of trade skills in Monsters and Memories. Each character could select 4 traits at the beginning of character creation. 2 of those traits were for combat, and 2 of those traits were for trade skills. So I think that trade skills are going to play a bigger role in the design of Monsters and Memories. Overall, the traits are likely going to be a major consideration when you create your character. I saw traits like 100% HP regeneration bonuses and Ultra Vision. Whether those remain in the game all the way through to release will remain to be seen. Unfortunately, the lag was just too bad for me to really experience combat in its full depth. I was invited to a group at one point, but the lag was so bad we weren't able to actually see how our skills worked together. I only managed to make it to level 2, so I really didn't get to feel how the game's progression system worked because the lag was so bad. There were times where I was hitting enemies and then they were kind of rubber banding around. Hopefully on the next stress test, the lag is a little bit better so I can experience more of the combat. This time around, I'm mainly focused on just running around the world and seeing what kind of world they're building for us to play in. Overall, I'm excited for Monsters and Memories. The graphics are looking good, and we've talked about how that needs a little bit more polish, but I think that they're going to get there. It looks like the devs are really paying attention to world building. Classes in the combat have a very familiar feel to them that will appeal to you if you're an EverQuest or old school RPG player. And hopefully on the next playtest, the lag is better so you can actually see what the combat is going to feel like in the actual game. The next playtest is December 9th, so I'm going to put a link to the Discord down in the description if you want to check that out. Be sure to subscribe to my channel if you enjoy old school MMOs because I'll definitely be making content about Monsters and Memories in the future. Thanks for watching. This is the MMocracy and have a nice day.